I am so out of practice. Hi YouTube. Long time no see. It's Friday night. It's probably been, I don't even know how long, 5, 6, maybe 8 months since I've recorded a video. Not so much doing the YouTube as much anymore. I got a lot of new things going on, and YouTube videos are just lower on my priority list. However, nothing's really changed as far as my subscriber count and things like that go. And every once in a while I still trickle in new subscribers, and I feel bad for them because I'm really not making all that many videos anymore. But it's Friday night. I have nothing better to do. And I figured, you know, my roommate is away on doing Comic-Con. So I figured I might as well just make a video and contribute to my whole damn collection video series, which eventually I will finish, even if it takes 28 years to do so. So that's what this video is. I'm going to do my whole damn collection, everything that's in my collection, my DVD and Blu Ray collection from the letter D. That doesn't include things like box sets or Criterions or documentaries. And I'll just talk a little bit about each DVD. Alright, the first video here, the first VHS tape that I have. First Blu-ray that I'm going to show in the letter D is Damsels in Distress. This is basically going to be alphabetical. This is directed by Whit Stillman. This is his latest film that just came out last year, starring Greta Gerwig, which anybody who's followed me on Video Clerks or here knows is one of my movie actress crushes. And he came back with this. This is a movie about a bunch of college students. Greta Gerwig runs this kind of strange community on the campus that is trying to take care of suicide prevention and suicide watch, and encourage students to kind of work through their problems and stuff. But she has this weird ulterior motive to the whole thing. Maybe she's trying to fix things in her own psychology. Maybe she's just doing so for social status. She also has these other strange ideas about curing people's depression with soap and creating a dance craze. Whit Stillman is a very stylized writer. His stuff is very kind of dry and satirical and a little detached, but also a little broadly comedic, all at the same time. Actually, if you watch this movie, and especially if you go back and watch his older movies, you can see a lot of where Wes Anderson kind of got his vibe, that kind of academic, comedic vibe. Daredevil movie, yes, that Daredevil movie that had Jennifer Garner and Ben Affleck in it, well before Affleck was getting nominated and winning Oscars for his directorial work. This kind of came out of the outgrowth of the superhero boom that sort of happened because of X-Men and Spider-Man, well before Nolan kind of changed the game and well before Marvel Studios was a thing. So stylistically, directorially, there's a lot of issues with this movie. I'm not going to forgive it completely. It doesn't totally play, but I don't think it's totally a failure either. I think there's a lot of cool stuff in here. I really like Colin Farrell as Bullseye. I think he's a very interesting movie villain. And if you've never seen the director's cut of this movie, it really is worth watching. The theatrical cut, which is the movie most people are talking about when they say they don't like this movie, deletes entire story threads that really help the script cohere. Peter Jackson's Dead Alive, also known as Brain Dead in the European DVDs, if you buy those, or New Zealand, where he's from. This was an early Peter Jackson, well before he won any Oscars, well before he even was considered anything more than a horror gore director. He kind of came off the heels of Sam Raimi and was doing a lot of the same things with gore and humor and mixing the two. This kind of out Raimi's Raimi in a lot of ways, and I think it's funnier than some of the Evil Dead movies, and I think it's definitely gorier than most, if not all, of the Evil Dead movies, short of the new remake. And it's a lot of fun. It's just a big, violent, rock and roll kind of horror comedy, and has a very strange ending, but it's definitely kind of a culty favorite, and I dig it a lot. One of my favorite directors who pop up often in this series is David Cronenberg. Dead Ringers. This is a movie he did in the late 80s. It stars Jeremy Irons, and he plays twins in the movie. He plays two people. It's a very strange, kind of dark, surreal drama, horror thriller. And it was one of the first movies that I think David Cronenberg really grew as a director. He was definitely not doing kind of B-movie material anymore in that kind of cerebral, detached way that he does even B-movies. This movie is a little bit... He's reaching a little further. I think he's trying new things. He's seeing how grounded he can keep things while still retaining his sensibility. It does definitely go into some dark places and some psychologically taut areas. It's still definitely a Cronenberg movie. The twins play, or the twins in this movie that are played by Jeremy Irons, are gynecologists, and so there's definitely a psychosexual element to the whole thing. Here's another Cronenberg movie. Like I said, one of my favorite directors. This is an adaptation of a Stephen King novel, and from what I've heard, though I've never read the source, it's one of his most accurate adaptations, and that is The Dead Zone. This was also turned into a TV series. This, I think, is quite a bit different than the series. The way it ends, it doesn't suggest that there could have been a series, so I'm not exactly sure what they did. But this stars Christopher Walken and Martin Sheen, and it deals with this guy played by Christopher Walken who has this kind of weird telepsychosis thing. He goes into a coma, he wakes up. When he touches people, he can see into their futures, near futures. He gets these flashes, these images, and he starts to see all these crazy things that he knows is going to happen, but nobody believes him. And he starts to lose his relationships because he doesn't really relate with the world anymore because he has too much knowledge. He has to make these very hard decisions on whether to act on these premonitions or not. It's a really good movie. It's a really tight screenplay. There's a lot of memorable performances, specifically Christopher Walken, who, he's kind of become something of a parody of himself, unfortunately, as he's gotten older, and the Walken idiosyncrasies are kind of seen as almost something to laugh at or comedic, and the cowbell and all that stuff. This is well before all that stuff, and I think he plays it for keeps, and he really is a good actor. He's kind of an actor's actor, and that's what this movie gets to showcase. And it's a very understated, subtle thriller, even more subtle than Dead Ringers as far as Cronenberg movies go. This isn't, technically it's a little bit more of a Stephen King movie than a Cronenberg movie, but it's done with a master's hand. Confession time. Sometimes I buy DVDs or Blu Rays because I know I should see them, and if they're good for a good deal, I'll put them in my collection, and every once in a while I'll pull them off my wall when I'm bored on a night like tonight, and eventually get to these movies I should have already seen. So I don't have a whole lot to say about this movie other than to say it also has Christopher Walken in it, and it's a classic. Deer Hunter was also a Best Picture winner in the 70s during the height of the Robert De Niro, when Robert De Niro was Robert De Niro. The Departed, this was also a Best Picture winner, directed by Martin Scorsese, who used to have a long-running career with Robert De Niro. Now he has a long-running career with Leonardo DiCaprio. And this is one of their first collaborations, and I really like this movie. This was a remake of the Chinese film Infernal Affairs, which I believe there was actually several sequels of that in China, but this is a remake of the first one, and there is a huge split between the opinion of The Departed on people who've seen Infernal Affairs and people who haven't. At the time that I saw this movie, I'd never seen Infernal Affairs before, so I love this movie. I think it's great. I think it was a return to form for Scorsese in a lot of ways. I think it was his best film since at least Casino, if not Goodfellas, and it kind of plays in a similar way. It's kind of like if you took Goodfellas and instead of Italian, you made it Irish in Boston, and then turned it into a police procedural as well. Really well casted, very large, all-star cast. DiCaprio and Matt Damon kind of playing opposite each other, even though they're barely in any scenes together. Almost kind of has a sort of a Michael Mannish type thematic undercurrent to it, with the whole idea of like the cop and the criminal, and they're trading places and entering each other's worlds and getting in each other's heads. I don't have to say a whole lot about The Departed because most people have seen it. I think it's brilliant. I love it. It gets better every time I watch it. The Descent. It's directed by Neil Marshall, a Scottish filmmaker. It's good. I mean, again, I shouldn't have to say a whole lot about it. I think most people have seen this. It's kind of relatively low budget, made in Scotland with almost a completely unknown cast, if not totally unknown. And it's about a team of female spelunkers who dive a little too deep in a cave, and it becomes kind of a creature feature. And it's a really good one, and it's really exciting, and it's really intense, and it's really violent, but it's also done very wisely. It almost kind of recalls kind of the first Alien movie in some ways, and it also really plays on this whole idea of sort of claustrophobic terror and psychological terror, and it has a really interesting ending, and I really like this movie a lot. I still think it's Neil Marshall's best film. He's released some good ones, and I'm in general a fan of his work, but he has yet to really deliver on the promise of this movie. Deliverance on Blu-ray, the Blu-ray book that I bought from Best Buy, I believe, is where I found it, although I'm sure you can get it just about anywhere, at least online. Directed by John Borman in the early 70s. Quintessential 70s film. Stars Jon Voight and Burt Reynolds. A bunch of kind of pre-yuppies. City folk go out into the woods to have a weekend, and they're river rafting. One of them gets injured, and the townsfolk of the wilderness that they're in take advantage of the fact that they're lost in the woods and they don't know much about nature. And it's sort of about that in a larger way. It's about how, you know, as we disconnect ourselves more and more and more from humanity, and the more that we think that we can sort of take nature into our own hands and sort of disregard the less advanced societies, that eventually has kind of a karmic effect, if you will. Pacific Rim just opened, and I just recently wrote a review for it that will be published in my newspaper within the next few days. But Guillermo del Toro, who just released that movie, has done a lot of other movies, and some of them he's done in his own native language, which is Spanish. And one of those movies is The Devil's Backbone. This predates obviously the Hellboy movies and Pacific Rim, as well as even Pan's Labyrinth, which I think a lot of people really kind of connect him with, especially his Spanish films. He has sort of a trilogy of sorts. starting with his first film, Kronos. This would sort of be the second film in that trilogy, and Pan's Labyrinth would sort of be the third, and there's sort of all supernatural movies about children and monsters and how they perceive the world differently as children than they would as adults in, you know, these dangerous worlds, and the way the monsters are actually scary, but at the same time sort of used as a device for character development, and it's a very thoughtful, interesting ghost movie, very different from most ghost films that you see in the US. It is very scary still, but it's also really kind of tender and really kind of warm, and it has a lot to say about its characters and really likes its characters, not just trying to torture them like most horror movies do. The movie Dick, and it is not what you might think it's about. This is kind of a forgotten comedy from the mid-90s. It stars younger Kirsten Dunst and Michelle Williams, when they were kind of still sort of known as teen stars, television, whatnot, Dawson's Creek, all that stuff. It seemed very produced by sort of the Lorne Michaels SNL Kids in the Hall crew. You have a lot of cast members from both. I have Will Ferrell in here and Dave Foley and a lot of other people. It's a really young performance from Ryan Gosling, Ryan Reynolds for a little while. And it's All the President's Men as done as a teenage comedy. Basically, the idea is that two dog walkers for the president, Nixon at that time, who lived in the Watergate Hotel, were privy to information they shouldn't have been able to know about, kind of get entangled in the whole Watergate deep throat scandal. So it's kind of a historical revisionist comedy that's actually pretty funny and pretty clever for what it is. Got this on Blu-ray not too long ago. This is Dick Tracy, starring Warren Beatty. I think this came out around 1991 or so, possibly 1990 even. Also stars Madonna, who had a few hit singles off of this at the time. She was sort of a superstar. Again, I think this is sort of a criminally underrated movie. I think a lot of people sort of forget about this movie and sort of how stylish and interesting and fun it was at that time. Kind of predates all of the, like, you know, the kind of fun, exciting, over-the-top period cartoon sort of style that kind of came around the same time as stuff like Who Framed Roger Rabbit and kind of post Indiana Jones, pulpy stuff, sort of like the Rocketeer and The Shadow that came a little bit after that. And it kind of, you could kind of even see it as sort of a precursor to what Robert Rodriguez would do digitally with Sin City, and then later The Spirit and even 300, whatever. That whole, like, kind of like, let's turn the entire environment into an over-the-top cartoon and sort of embrace that pulpiness. It's a lot of fun. It's kind of a mystery, sort of gangster movie noir hybrid comic booky thing. It's really great if you've never seen it before, and I think it actually should be seen on Blu-ray because the production design is so cool. I'm still talking way too much about each movie. Die Hard. This is actually not a Blu-ray, although it has been released on Blu-ray in several different editions. This is part of the 5 Stars collection. I've mentioned this before in other updates. Basically, it was this kind of weird collection of films that was released through, and I think I had to look it up last time too, released through 20th Century Fox, and they released a bunch of movies in this, and they're pretty cool kind of collector's editions. They usually come with more than one disc, a lot of information. I believe I have a few other versions of this. I know that I have Independence Day and The Doors and a few other movies that come in this edition, but it's pretty cool, and I've actually opted to keep this rather than upgrading to the Blu-ray until I find out how many of these special features, because there's quite a bit, make it on those other editions. Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, starring Michael Caine and Steve Martin. This is kind of a con artist comedy between the two of them. A lot of broad slapstick moments, a lot of kind of odd couple sort of humor between the two of them. Yeah, not a whole lot to say. It's kind of a comedy classic from that era, back when Steve Martin used to be really, really cool, and got a very different sort of role for Michael Caine prior to all his Batman shenanigans. District 9 on Blu Ray. This was one of my favorite movies from that year, I think, 2009. And I still go back to this every once in a while and rewatch it. I think it's really interesting. It melds together a lot of interesting genre ideas, a lot of subversion of the sort of the alien invasion thing, and almost making it into a racial allegory. Of course, it takes place in Johannesburg, South Africa, and it has an interesting sense of setting and sense of place that most mainstream movies don't have, while at the same time it reminds you of a lot of other cool alien invasion movies, as well as some other stuff like The Fly and etc. I dug this movie a lot, and I'm really looking forward to the director, Neil Blomkamp's follow-up to that, which is Elysium. It comes at the end of the summer. Quentin Tarantino's Django Unchained. I was just watching a few interviews about this. This is his last movie. Of course, it was nominated for Best Picture. I think he won Best Screenplay, Best Original Screenplay, and Christoph Waltz won for Best Supporting Actor, again working with Tarantino, as he did in Inglourious Basterds a few years prior. This isn't one of my favorite Tarantino movies. I bought it because it's a lot of fun to watch, and I think it's a pretty neat movie. I think it was a little overpraised for its time, and I think as time goes by it will kind of be seen as lesser Tarantino. I have some issues, some script issues with the movie, but I think it's still, lesser Tarantino is still better than the greatest Paul W.S. Anderson. The Dodeca Pentathlon, this was directed by the Duplass brothers. I have a few other movies by them that I've shown in previous videos before. This came out the same year that they released Jeff Who Lives at Home, which is a slightly more mainstream effort. This is a very independent-styled comedy about two brothers who play these made-up games that they've been doing since childhood to win a fake award that they invented. And it's sort of about brotherhood rivalry and how that changes as you get older. One brother is kind of a drifter, the other one is sort of married and settled down, and maybe they sort of envy each other's lives and their decisions, and blah, 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 blah. A lot of the script or a lot of the screenplay is improvised by the actors, which is very common in their movies, especially their lower budget things. It's definitely worth a look if you're into super low budget sort of Sundancey stuff. Dog Day Afternoon on Blu Ray, starring Al Pacino, directed by the late, great Sidney Lumet. This is a good movie, and it's especially a good movie to see if you've never seen it before, and it's a really good movie to see during the summer. I screened this movie at a party last year with, it's a double feature with Do the Right Thing as sort of a theme about people who get really frustrated in high temperatures. High tensions and high temperatures. That was the name of the theme. I'm a super nerdy guy, just in case you weren't already aware. This is a really cool movie, one of the best movies from the 70s. One of Al Pacino's better performances, and it bravely tackles issues of sexuality at a time when that was not necessarily something you did in a normal genre picture, but he does it really well here. It's basically about a few bank robbers, or would-be bank robbers, who break into a small bank in New York and kind of get locked in after they're surrounded by the police, and it becomes this sort of intense drama about the police trying to keep in contact with the people inside to make sure that nothing goes awry, and allegiances evolve and break and blah blah blah. It's a really good movie, really well written movie, and it's very well directed and acted as well. This is the first film by Neil Marshall, who later on went on to direct The Descent, and this is a werewolf war movie called Dog Soldiers. Again, also takes place in Scotland with an all-Scottish unknown cast. Super low budget, but he uses that budget very, very well. A really cool werewolf movie. They don't make a lot of those. There's been a lot of shitty werewolf movies as of lately, thanks to the Twilight Saga and everything thereabout. But this is a really interesting movie, and it takes a lot of cool turns and twists, and it's a little bit deeper than your average werewolf movie, and actually has characters you remember. Even though some of the special effects definitely show the budget. Dogma, this was the 2-disc version on DVD. I believe there's a Blu Ray version of this now, which I might trade up to. This was the first Kevin Smith movie I ever saw, and it kind of spoke a lot to me at that time because I was raised in a very Christian environment, and so everything that he's saying here about faith and questioning your faith was very resonant to me at the age that I saw this, as well as I thought it was just hilarious. I still think this is one of his funniest movies. Maybe not one of his best. I think the screenplay is a little bit messy, and there's a few too many characters that kind of watered down the Linda Florentino character, who should keep the spotlight a little bit more often. But those are just my criticisms. I still think it's a great movie, and it's still one of his most daring movies. Dogville, directed by Lars von Trier. I've only seen a few von Trier movies, and if you know anything about him, he's a very polarizing filmmaker. He makes very experimental movies. He makes very uncomfortable movies that go into strange and dark places. This movie is kind of a period piece that takes place in American early 20th century-ish, I want to say. Yeah, it took place probably around the 30s, I would suppose. But it's about a woman who's sort of escaping the mob, and she runs into a small town called Dogville, where she tries to sort of integrate into their community, and a lot of crazy things happen to her with the locals once they sort of realize who she is and what she's doing there. The sets are all done in this super stripped-down, minimalist, almost kind of like a stage play. There's no actual houses or buildings or things like that, even though it's shot like a movie, and it has, you know, edits and time lapses and all that stuff, and angles and like close-ups, like everything you would see in a normal movie. The houses and the buildings are all indicated with markings on the floor and titles that are written there, almost like an empty soundstage before the sets are built. And I'm not 100% sure what all of that style really lends to the story. I've only seen the movie once, but it really did stick with me. It's very well written. It has almost kind of a novelistic approach to the screenplay. It's even narrated, and it's a great movie. And if you're gonna if you're gonna see any Von Trier movie, you should start with Dogville, because it's both has some of his weirdest stuff in it, but some of his most accessible storytelling. Donnie Darko. I used to work at a video store. I don't anymore. As you know, I used to host a show on YouTube called The Video Clerks, a channel I used to have, which kind of spun out into this channel. But a joke I said often when I used to work at the video store is, you know, this is a cult classic, you know, along with like Fight Club and Clockwork Orange, those kind of punk rock movies that about outsiders tend to never stay on the wall if you don't have too many copies of it. They're always checked out because somebody asked me that, a person came in asking for this movie, said, well, how come Donnie Darko is never in? And I said, because somebody is always turning 16 every day. It's a good movie. I don't think it's as good as I thought it was when I was a teenager. As I got older, I kind of realized how derivative it is of David Lynch, and a lot of his style and his storytelling tropes. But it does have a lot more emotion than most David Lynch movies, and I think the emotional core of this movie is what keeps me coming back to it now and being able to still appreciate it, even if some of his nods to Lynch are a little too clear and obvious. But it's cool, moody, atmospheric, takes place in the 80s and makes use of the soundtrack in a cool way. Great early performance from Jake Gyllenhaal, very intense performance. Great supporting characters, good ensemble. It really is a good film despite its shortcomings. Neil Marshall shows up yet again in this category, and I guess he likes movies with the letter D. Doomsday, this was his follow-up to The Descent, a studio release film, not independent. He almost kind of made this movie as if he was never going to be able to make another movie. Like he had just heard the year prior that he was going to die in 6 months. So he almost made this movie as a reaction to that. He didn't. I mean, he's still alive. He directs Game of Thrones episodes or whatever. But that was the spirit of this movie. Was like, if I could do one more movie, I want to shove in everything that I love about it. It's kind of a fanboy indulgence, if you will, and kind of in the best way possible. There's a lot of stuff in here. It's kind of his ode to every action film he ever saw and loved from the 80s. You get a little bit of Day of the Dead. You get a little bit of Escape from New York and Escape from L.A. You get a little bit of Alien, or Aliens, sorry. You even get a little bit of like Highlander-ish type stuff in there. It's all just this huge mashup, and it has a lot of energy, and it's a lot of fun, and the story doesn't make sense, but it kind of doesn't matter. The Doors by Oliver Stone. I thought this was one of those 5-star collections, but it's not. It's just in a very similar case. I guess probably not his best movie, or probably one of his most well-known, but if you're a fan of the band, or you're a fan of Jim Morrison as a cult of personality, this is pretty fun to watch. Has a lot of style. It sort of celebrates the atmosphere of the Doors music, and he kind of sets out to make a movie that's as psychedelic as their music was, and as spacey and esoteric and weird and a little dark. And it kind of covers their getting together and their rise and fall and all of that stuff, and Jim Morrison's descent into madness. And it does so in that kind of cut and paste, weird, strange, Oliver Stoney sort of way. Double Indemnity. This was directed by Billy Wilder in the early 40s. Considered one of the first film noirs. And it's one of the first film noirs that also went on to basically set a pattern for which many noirs and neo-noirs would copy. This whole idea of sort of the know-nothing idiot who falls in love for the evil, manipulative Spider-Woman and how she sort of tangles him in his web. It's about an insurance man who falls in love with a mistress who's trying to knock off her husband for money. It's a good movie, and if you've never seen it before, it still totally holds up. I mean, it's definitely an older film, but it is well told and well directed and well acted. Just recently bought this. This is Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog by Joss Whedon, the guy who would later go on to do movies like The Avengers. This was kind of when he was between projects. He released this as a web series, I think in 7 or so episodes. The movie as a whole is actually fairly short. I think it's actually, might be under an hour even, about 70 minutes, maybe something like that. It's a musical. He's done other musicals as well in his past with like Buffy, the television show. And he brings in a lot of people he's worked with from Firefly and Buffy and all of that kind of stuff, and it's kind of a labor of love, kind of similar to what he did with Much Ado About Nothing. It's made for quite a low budget, but it's a lot of fun, and it's very, very funny. It stars Neil Patrick Harris and Nathan Fillion, Felicia Day from the other web show, the one about World of Warcraft. It's a good movie. The original Bela Lugosi Universal Horror classic Dracula. This comes with both the Spanish cut and the American cut of the movie. They were shot simultaneously. One was shot during the day, the other one was shot at night. A lot of people say that the Spanish film is actually better because of that that it was shot at night instead of during the day. I don't know. It's a good movie. It's Dracula. I shouldn't have to say much about that. Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was directed by Francis Ford Coppola in the early 90s. Keanu Reeves and Gary Oldman. I really like this movie. I saw it at sort of the right age. It really freaked me out as a kid. Like, it's one of the most overtly horror movies I saw at a very young age and kind of affected me. And I thought it was really scary and kind of atmospheric. I see now that there's issues with it. Certainly Keanu Reeves was miscast. Probably Winona Ryder too. But I really like the style of this movie, and I really like the thick, sort of proto-erotic tension in almost every single scene, every single shot. Nicholas Winding Refn's movie Drive. As you might notice, this has a strange cover, and there's a past video where I talk about why I downloaded this alternate cover that was available for a little while and printed it at my Kinko's and slipped it in there. I think it's a lot better than the one they have. This is a good movie. This was my favorite movie of that year. I think it was 2011. A lot of style, kind of a great love letter throwback to sort of the late 70s or early 80s kind of neo-noir thrillers, movies like Thief or Manhunter or The Driver, the Walter Hill movie, done in sort of this weird Euro sensibility. I liked it a lot. I think I'm looking very much forward to Only God Forgives, which came out just this last weekend. I have to wait for it. Drive me crazy. I have a penchant for teen movies of the 90s. Maybe it's because I was a teen in the late 90s, or preteen. This stars Melissa Joan Hart, who was well known as Sabrina the Teenage Witch at the time, and Adam Grenier from Entourage, before he did that show. And it's kind of a, two lovers from two different worlds, or two people from two different worlds who kind of meet and learn by sort of faking it how to love each other. It's very corny, but I actually think it's a pretty well-written little movie, and I really like the performances. Drugstore Cowboy. This was done by Gus Van Sant. I think this was his first film, filmed in Portland in the early 90s. Stars Matt Dillon. And it's basically about these people who ramshack department drugstores, and it's sort of about addiction, and it's sort of about being an outsider, and it's sort of about living on the street and what that's like. And it's a good movie, and it's kind of an indie film classic. And the last movie I have to show is DuckTales, the movie, Treasure of the Lost Lamp. This is kind of a staple of my childhood. I used to have this on VHS tape, taped off TV, and I would watch it all the time. This was actually released theatrically, and it looks a lot better than the TV series. The animation's a lot crisper and nicer. The sound design is a lot bigger, but it's still DuckTales, and they're basically doing their version of Aladdin. It's a good movie, and it has a lot of fun voice talent. Everybody from comedian Rip Taylor to Christopher Lloyd, who does the villain. And this was just Disney's version of Aladdin, which they would actually later do in theater, which is sort of funny. Even a lot of the plot dynamics are pretty similar, other than the fact that it takes place in Duckburg from the TV show. But if you've never seen this before, and it is sort of lost in Disney obscurity now, it's definitely worth checking out. I believe it's still available to buy on the .coms. So that's basically this update. I know this has gone on way too long. I'm going to have to edit the hell out of this to get to a watchable length. But it's been a while since I've done this, so I guess I'm a little excited. And I'm talking a little bit too much. Even now, I'm talking a little bit too much. Even though I don't really make that many videos anymore, I am still available online in many other avenues. As I've mentioned in a previous video, I do a weekly podcast, 1 hour, sometimes goes on a little bit too long as well, with a friend from Portland, Oregon, who we record over Skype. We see movies every week, and I review them for my newspaper, the Idaho State Journal, as well as a monthly alternative rag called the Basic Alternative here in Pocatello, Idaho, and those reviews are available at a few different places. I will post links below for that. I have a blog that I post them to called Salad Fork Reviews, and I update that every time I turn in new content. So if you are a reader and if you want to know my thoughts and they're a little bit more succinct, then there's a good place to look at it. Also, if you are interested in my podcast, if you want to hear what I say about the new movies just as they come out, and I'm trying to put them in their historical context of that particular week, with a friend, and it's an unedited podcast, so we cover a lot of topics, not just movies, but we also talk about our lives, the news, not like the news, the boring news, but movie news, entertainment news, as well as we also review stuff that's available on Netflix. That is called Jabber and the Drone, and I will post a link for that as well. Until then, until I post another video doing the rest of this collection series, as well as anything else I might want to do, those are the places to find me and keep up with me. Please subscribe to the podcast, please read my reviews, and please comment on this video if there's anything you wanted to say about this. Otherwise, I'll talk to you later. Bye.